paranoid among us, like your boy, might consider information a liability rather than an asset. If a secret gets out, you're in for a world of hurt. What's up, y'all? Dr. Mehdi here. Let's talk sec. All right, so I wanted to talk about the CIA Triad. I know this is very basic, like information security 101 stuff, and it makes perfect sense. You go to school and you learn it in class, and you don't need to learn the why because it speaks for itself. There is a reason why this has stood the test of time. But I wanted to dig into like what conditions in the universe cause someone to think up the CIA Triad. Where did this come from? How did this become so key to not only cybersecurity, but computer systems as a whole? So I dug in, and what do you know, this has nothing to do with either the CIA or the Triads. It started back in the 1960s. It was formally published in the 1970s, like with most stuff in computer science. Even the cutting edge machine learning, predictive models, predictive text sort of things, ChatGPT, the foundations of all of this goes back to the 1960s and the 1970s, usually funded by the Department of Defense. Anyway, let's dig in. So what prompted this? What were the changes in the computer ecosystem that required developing the CIA Triad? Well, the first computer systems were monolithic devices. They served a single purpose. They were single user, single program. They were operated by a team with similar roles. What I mean by that is everyone who used this specific computer that was the size of an entire room had the same clearance level. They were working on the same project. They had the same job. Everybody who used that was allowed to see the information that was on that computer. There was no reason to hide anything from anybody. The way that you kept that information safe was you put that computer into a secure room with big bolted doors, and you put armed guards at the front. The armed guards would check your ID. If you were allowed in that room, you got to use that computer and you got to see all of the data that was on that computer. This was computer security in the before times. If you were allowed to use that computer, you were allowed to use that data, you were allowed to execute it, you were allowed to read it, you were allowed to modify it, you could do whatever you want back when you had control over your own data. You wouldn't need to worry about access controls and whatever operating systems existed back then. You gave the computer the data, you told it what to do with the data, the computer did that thing with the data. That was it, you were done. You had your calculations and you went on your merry way. No big deal. But by the 1960s, our use of computers grew. We needed more of them, but they were still expensive, super expensive. So it would be nice if this huge chunk of like circuits and electricity that we just blew our entire operating budget on, we could get more use out of it than a single team and a single project at a time. It would be nice if, like the accounting department, for example, it would be nice if, for example, the accounting department could use it to do accounting stuff and the strategy department could use it to do strategy stuff. They wouldn't have to worry about different classification levels. Like, let's say the strategy department is operating at a top secret level and the accounting department is operating at a secret level. For example, I'm not in the military. I don't know. That's outside my lane. Whatever. But if they could use the same hardware, you wouldn't have to buy two separate computers. You wouldn't have to pay two sets of armed guards. You wouldn't have to build two secure rooms that are separate from each other. You could just use the same one and let the computer itself worry about protecting the strategy data from the accountants. The primary issue here is resource sharing. If everyone using the computer has the same level of access, they can share resources, no big deal. When you're trying to combine different users, different groups onto the same hardware, these sorts of computer systems became known as open systems. The operating system needed ways to understand, first of all, who was using it, and second of all, what type of access that specific user had. Furthermore, we started to see the value of connecting computers together. It wasn't just the DOD, universities were joining it. There was computer science research starting to pop up more and more places. It would be really helpful if these different groups that were both researching the same thing, trying to improve our operating systems, improve our computational power, improve our methods, improve our etc. It would be nice if these computers could talk to each other. But before we could do that, we had to ensure that there was no data leakage. We had to make sure that people who shouldn't see the data were kept from it. With multiple users potentially carrying out multiple roles, running multiple programs on the same hardware, it became imperative that we develop an operating system that could handle security itself. So multi-user OpenU systems came about because of collaborations between the US government, tech companies at the time, and universities. So in 1972, the US Air Force commissioned a working group of turbo nerds to study the problem of keeping information secure. Information security is nothing new to the US government. We just needed a way to translate it from the meat space into the virtual space. The result of this collaboration was the Computer Security Technology Planning Study, sometimes called the Anderson Report after its primary author, James Anderson. The principal unsolved technical problem found by the working group was that that of how to provide multi-level resource and information sharing systems secure against the threat from a malicious user. This problem is neither hopeless nor solved. It is, however, perfectly clear to the panel that solutions to this problem will not occur spontaneously, nor will they come from the various well-intentioned attempts to provide security as an add-on to existing systems. Alright, so another key insight to this report is that bug-free is not the same as secure. I mean, we've been writing software for decades at this point. We sent people to the moon on software that we wrote at this point. The dorks who have been writing this software have been striving for bug-free this entire time, but they were still making insecure code. Bug-free is not the same as secure. It's closely related. If you have bug-free software, you're eliminating certain classes of vulnerabilities, but you need to build a system from the ground up that has security in mind. So a lot of these systems were built with bug-free as the priority, but once security started becoming an issue, all of these systems were just one phone call to the Tiger team away from being completely owned. More on... Tiger teams are also an interesting story, but more on them in a future video if this channel goes anywhere. So the panel in the planning study concluded that in order to design secure systems, first of all, you had to agree on what security meant. What is a secure system? Once everyone agrees on what secure means, then they, and everyone designing systems in the future, has a model to work off of. This would allow all these teams designing these secure systems to 1, be on the same page about goals, and 2, speak the same language. A side note on the Anderson report, which by the way, it's an interesting read. The term access control has a footnote in it, which is kind of cool because like these days when you talk to security professionals or whatever, like the lingo, the access control is taken as a given. It's taken as like, oh, this is so ingrained in our security culture, everyone just knows what it means. But back then in the 1970s when this report was commissioned, it needed a definition. Another thing I noticed while reading these reports is the term threat is mentioned everywhere. Even back then, they understood that in order to understand how to secure a system, you needed to understand what threats were targeting the system. What was the threat landscape? Once you understood the threats, then you could formulate plans for how to protect against them. So James Anderson used the findings of this study to shill a promising direction called his reference monitor. The reference monitor is perhaps something we might dig into in a later video, but for now, just think of it as a small, contained, simple piece of hardware that anytime any subject on a computer wanted to perform any action on any object, that action would go through the reference monitor. The reference monitor would look up its huge table. Is this person allowed to do this thing to this piece of information? If the answer was yes, it would allow the action to continue. If the answer was no, it would reject it. So that's cool and all, but that's not exactly what we're looking for. We want to know how Anderson defines security. Remember the initial question, what is security? How can we get everyone on the same page when discussing their security goals? Well, Anderson answers that. And to put it specifically, in Appendix 1 of Volume 2, the report describes the traditional statement of security threat. And this traditional statement consisted of 3 parts. Sounds familiar, huh? The first, information recovery. The second, manipulation of information. And the third, denial or degradation of service. So this is where we're getting somewhere. This might sound familiar, but not exactly how we might think of it today. This is from the perspective of the attacker. When he says information recovery, he means the attacker being able to get confidential information, being able to steal information. Today we use recovery as like, if you forget your password, there are steps for you to recover your account. It's the same thing if you're an attacker, you're recovering sensitive information. Also, some of you might have noticed that James Anderson characterized this as the traditional statement of information threat. So obviously these 3 go back before the Anderson report. However, in my research, all of the links I clicked, all of the references that I followed, this is as early as I could find. The Anderson report was as early as I can find. So I don't know in the context of cybersecurity, in the context of all this computer bullshit, how far back this goes. This is as early as I could find it. Anyway. All right, so perhaps the first thing that comes to mind with information security is keeping information secret. The C in the CIA Triad, confidentiality. Confidentiality, keeping a secret, requires 2 parts. 1, information that needs to be kept secret. Duh. 2, knowing who this information should be kept a secret from. This is part of the reason why I wanted to make this video. I don't feel like people really talk about the second part. If you don't have anybody to keep the secret from, then it's not a secret. You're wasting all this time and effort protecting information that doesn't need to be protected. On the other hand, if the secret needs to be kept from everybody, then you're just better off destroying it. It costs time, it costs money, it takes effort, it involves risk to keep a secret. And if nobody's allowed to have access to that information anyway, just get rid of it. I don't know. Okay, so it can be easy to forget that keeping a secret is a problem. The paranoid among us, like ya boy, might consider information a liability rather than an asset. If a secret gets out, you're in for a world of hurt. All right, so we've seen these issues with confidentiality play out all the time in the news cycle. I mean, it seems like every single day a new story comes out about a breach at a bank, social media, credit bureau, or whatever. where millions of customer records are released into the wild. All of these companies have to pay huge costs in the form of, reputational damage. They now have to pay for identity theft protection. You might get emails from a website you haven't used in years saying that they're offering you 3 months or a year of identity theft protection. That costs them money. That is real time and money that they have to put in because they lost your information, because they failed to keep a secret. Or, for example, the intelligence apparatuses in the US, the secrets that they keep protect real human lives. It also protects this in the same way that if a company loses information, they suffer reputational damage. If the United States military loses information, they also suffer reputational damage. Could you imagine if word got out that the Vietnam War was accidentally started because the US Navy mistook bad weather for an attack by the North Vietnamese? Stuff like that would be embarrassing if it were true. Or any number of other things. Look, all I'm saying is people would get really mad. So the bottom line here is that you need to make sure that the benefit of using this information is worth the risk of keeping this information. So the I in the CIA triad is integrity. Information integrity means knowing that the information is good. You know that this information has not been tampered with. So in his 1975 paper, The Protection of Information in Computer Systems, American computer scientist Jerry Salzer described this as unauthorized information modification. An unauthorized person is able to make changes in stored information, a form of sabotage. Note that this kind of violation does not require that the intruder see the information that he has changed. There's some cool bits here and some cool bits in that paper at large. I recommend you give it a read. One thing I wanted to point out here is that the attacker in this scenario doesn't necessarily need to know the information. You could have done very well in keeping your secret. Nobody else knows that information who shouldn't know it. The attacker went in and changed that information. That's still a problem. Not only do you want to keep the secret, you want to make sure that information is good when you go to use it. I'm trying to think of an example here. Some people... That's stupid. That's cringe. Okay. Let's say you're part of a clandestine operation. I'm your contact. I drop a package of info into a Dropbox, a location that only you and I know. I walk away, I have my trench coat and my hat. Everyone's none the wiser. A few hours later, a few days later, you come to the drop location, you pick up the package, and you skedaddle. But what if our plans were breached? What if someone else knows that this package is going to be there at this time? And they go in after I put the package there, but before you pick it up. But they don't want to steal the package. That does them no good. What they want to do is change the information in it. So they open the package up very delicately. They change some things around, blah, 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 whatever. They put the package back. No one could tell a difference. And they walk away. Here you come in, you grab the package, you take it back to your hideout. You open it up, and you're looking at bad information now. How would you even know that? As far as you know, I dropped off the package and then you picked it up. Even if the attacker here, the third party in this case, didn't read the information in the package, they just switched it around, it makes this whole operation useless. So this is an example of integrity failure. What's especially pernicious here is that if the attacker just stole the package, you would know something is wrong because the package is not there. Either I screwed up, someone took it, whatever. We have actionable information here. The problem here is that the attacker didn't steal anything. They just changed it. You have no idea anything is wrong. Integrity means you are looking at the information you're supposed to be looking at, and it's the entire picture. So this was the original working definition of integrity. Some of you might be tearing your hair out. Many, many more useful properties to integrity that are not included here. But this is what integrity was back in the 70s. You have the complete information. But what does complete mean exactly? How do I know the information actually came from who it says it came from? Is it a problem if I get sent this information more than once? How many times can I use this information? Anyway, those sorts of extensions and dialogue and discussions are fodder for a future video. Finally, availability. So some folks, some folks might misremember this as authorization, but it's availability. If a person is entitled to information, then they should be able to see it. The classic example that I always hear when talking about availability is, if you want to keep a secret safe, write your secret on a piece of paper, put that paper into a lockbox, chain up the lockbox, throw away the key, drive out to the middle of the ocean, and sink that lockbox down to the bottom of the Marianas Trench. There, boom. Your secret is safe. Ain't nobody getting to it. Great. I love that for you, babe. But what happens if you need to read that secret? What happens if you need to use that information? Are you going to call up James Cameron to swim down there and get it for you in his submersible? He doesn't even have the key. You threw that away. This is unusable information. This is a failure of availability. In this particular case, it's no different than just destroying that information, which in my opinion, maybe more people should do. Letting people in who are allowed to see this information is just as important as keeping the hackers out. Remember, the only reason you're taking on all of this risk of keeping a secret is because there is some benefit to using this information. Make sure you're able to see that benefit. So just like with integrity, failures of availability don't necessarily require an attacker. You might have heard of the Reddit hug. This is where someone makes this cute little online tool or website or whatever, someone links it to Reddit, and it gets really popular on Reddit. shoots up to the top of the list. Everyone's clicking on that link to go visit the website, and the website just can't handle all this popularity and traffic all at once, and it goes down. Reliability engineers constantly worry about things like earthquakes, storms, hurricanes, crashing their data centers, volcanoes, or whatever. So when they're building their systems, they make sure to place their data stores in multiple locations all around the world to safeguard from these sorts of things. So attacks on availability can be deeply technical, they can be super sophisticated, or they could be just dumb luck. You're in the wrong place at the wrong time and your data center gets wiped out. Or they can be just like pretty stupid. For example, if I wanted to keep you from getting into your house, I could just stick a piece of chewed bubble gum into your lock, and then you can't get your key in there to unlock the door. I never got into your house, I'm not stealing anything, but also, more importantly, you're not getting into your house either. This sort of thing can even happen from people who are allowed access into the system when it's just an accident. Think of like accidentally locking your keys in your car. Nobody hacked you, there was no malicious intent, but the end result is the same. Your dumbass can't get into your own car. Alright, so there's a lot of more recent research on the CIA triad. The initial definition was great, it got everyone on the same page, and it got everyone speaking the same language. But as time has gone on, we've found that there are holes in it. There are ways that it needs to be extended. This sort of stuff is fodder for a future video. There's plenty to talk about. That being said, we can still appreciate how this very basic three-pronged model of cybersecurity that came about in the 1960s is still useful in our understandings of threat to this day. There are also some interesting conversations about how you prioritize each of the three pillars of the triad, because there's no such thing as perfect security. You can only get perfect security if you have infinite time and infinite money, and since none of us have either of those, we just have to make do with what we got. We have to understand our specific system, our specific goals, our own specific threats, and then cater our security posture towards them. So like maybe you chill out on one aspect of the triad and focus on another. In his thesis on securing industrial control systems, Dr. Mehdi, PhD, describe some scenarios in which you might prioritize one aspect over another. Let's say you're running the NSA. You might prefer that the whole show come to a stop rather than letting a secret out the door. If somehow attackers get into your system, you might be in the server room, unplugging cables, shutting everything down to make sure none of those secrets actually get out. The most important thing to you is keeping those secrets in-house. There are lives at stake, there's reputation at stake. You don't care if the whole NSA goes down, you want to keep those secrets. On the other hand, imagine that you are running a hospital or you're running a manufacturing plant. These are scenarios where downtime in the case of the plant, an hour of downtime could cost the company millions of dollars. In the case of the hospital, an hour of downtime could cost actual human lives. You would rather have a failure of confidentiality than a failure of availability. You want that system up and running because there are lives at risk. Anyway, that's all I got. If you liked the video, like and subscribe. If you didn't like the video, like and subscribe anyway. I don't care. Leave comments at the bottom describing why you hate me and hate my stupid face. I'm not here to impress you. I'm just here for clout. Clout!